So I worked in forest maintenance and forest ag for quite a while. Some friends owned a big plot of land in the Rocky Mountains. A group of us, more guys, 18 to 38 years of age, would gather together several times a year, go into the mountains for several days and clear scrub brush, make fire breaks and, when appropriate, cut Christmas trees. This particular time it was early spring and our crew of 9, on 3 Gator 4-wheel drive vehicles, was at about 9,200 feet elevation, I would guess. There was a fairly significant amount of snow on the ground. We had put in a long day's work and were headed to camp, until the old guy of the crew asked if we wanted to head to the slope. This was a near treeless slope, free of any large rocks, about 100 yards wide. It also had tracks of big trees on either side. We would go there and, using one of the gators, tow a tube downhill in the snow, and it was really a lot of fun. So we got to the slope, set up a fire pit, cracked open the whiskey, and started having our fun. We all took several turns being towed, and Jeff was the new guy, and the youngest, 18. But we were giving him the craziest rides, swinging him close to the trees to kind of freak him out. A sort of initiation process, I guess. It was about 1 a.m. at this point, pitch black except for our dying fire and lightly snowing. Not the smartest or safest things I've ever done, but one of the most fun, that's for sure. Just as we were wrapping up on one of the last rides, though, and heading back to camp, Jeff freaked the hell out. He was stumbling over his words and couldn't express himself very clearly, but finally we got out of him that about 3/4 of the way down he had seen a man standing a few yards into the woods. He was wearing a trapper's hat, one of those ones with a flipped-up bill and ear flaps like in Fargo, and it played Mackinaw. We were all a bit skeptical at first. I mean, we were on a big plot of private property at elevation in somewhat hostile weather. But we took the rifles off the gators and got our flashlights and gave it a look. And we didn't find anything, not even footprints. We ended up chalking it up to just inexperience, a spooky environment, and of course whiskey, and headed back to camp about an eighth of a mile away, I suppose. But Jeff, he didn't sleep all night, and he was convinced that he saw someone. Eventually, though, the next morning came, and we drove the gators to the house on the property, got in our trucks, and headed into the little town nearby for breakfast. We had our breakfast, and were heading back to the property to say our goodbyes and go our separate ways, but as we neared the intersection of the public dirt road and the private dirt drive to the house, there were several police cars and an ambulance. We pulled over and stopped to talk to the police, who informed us that the closest neighbors had found a body in the ditch as they were heading down the mountain. Police had followed, in reverse, footprints up the hill to the slope and then across a neighboring property to another perpendicular road. They asked if we knew anything, and of course we told them about the Mackinaw man. And sure enough, it was him. We still have no idea what was going on that night, if he was a danger to us, or if he could have been helped, or what. But poor Jeff in the end got his whiskey and meals paid for the next several weeks by all of us guys, but he still gets guff about it to this day. My childhood home was in a desolate place surrounded by forests. I have my fair share of strange stories, but this one scared me the most. So I was home alone at night as my mum and stepdad had gone out to the store. This wasn't that strange because I was 15, so perfectly capable of staying alone for an hour or two. But then something started pounding on the front door. I thought it was my stepdad at first, that maybe they'd forgotten their key or something. I got up to let them in, but then I saw my 2 little dogs, and they normally ran up to the door and barked at anyone there. Instead, they were looking up at me from the couch with something that I can't explain in their eyes. I had a bad feeling about everything, so I chose not to open the door, and instead I hid in my bedroom and called my mum. And of course, she didn't answer. But the weird thing is that I didn't hear the phone at the door either, which meant that it definitely wasn't them. But the knocking on the door quickly stopped and moved to my bedroom window at this point. I had a tapestry hanging in front of it, so I couldn't see outside at whatever was knocking. But I started to really panic, and after another minute or two, my mum answered the phone. The knocking totally stopped then, and the bad feeling that I had just disappeared. The strange thing is that we have outside dogs, and if a person or large animal had come into my yard, they would have gone just crazy barking at them. There was also a bunch of mud in front of my window, but there were no footprints in it. Now, I'm normally a very skeptical person, but I still can't explain this years later. It's definitely changed my mind about ever living in a rural area, but a lot of people have suggested things like wasps or moths before. But I always tell them that this happened in the middle of winter, so there weren't really any bugs around. I didn't live in an area with bugs big enough to make that loud of a sound anyway. I should also mention too that one of the scariest things about this was how human the knocking sounded. To be specific, whatever it was knocked the exact way that my stepfather did, as in he would go from the door to my bedroom window to get my attention. The whole situation was quite frightening at the time and pretty creepy when I think about it, and something that I don't think that I'll ever forget. I've always been interested in the paranormal, but considered myself pretty skeptical. I figured that paranormal things happen to other people, but not me. My mum is a very talented psychic as well, which I didn't believe for the longest time until she started learning about it. And she always said that she had experiences in the house that I grew up in. They live in a newer home now, built in the 90s. In my old house, though, my parents, my brother, and me all had adjoining rooms, but mine was in the middle. Now, I always had bad nightmares in that room and felt off in it, but I just chalked it up to having my own room for the first time. One night, though, I was up too late on the internet and I heard a faint knock. I figured my brother needed something, so I went to open the door, but when I did, there was nothing there. I just kind of shrugged it off, and maybe I was just hearing things, and a few moments later I heard another knock, this time coming from the wall that my bed was on. It shared a wall with my brother's room, so I ignored it again until it picks up. The knocking started in the top corner of the wall and came down at an angle and would stop at where my head was. At this point, I must admit that I started to get freaked out, but I just tried to ignore it, thinking that it must have been my brother or something. But it kept happening, same pattern even, and eventually I thought that maybe it was the pipes. But I went to see if my brother was messing with me, and I went into his room to him being fast asleep, and realized that he had one of those massive IKEA bookshelves that covered the entire wall that was between our rooms anyway, which meant that there was physically no way that he could have been knocking that wall. So I decided to test it. When the knocking continued, I waited for it to stop by my head and knocked a similar pattern. And, to my shock, whatever it was knocked back. I was crying at this point, and I just tried to go to sleep, but the knocking continued the entire night, and after that night, it never came back. The next instance in this house was the voices in the basement. I heard people talking, and I figured someone had left the TV on downstairs. I ran downstairs to check it out, but there was nothing. The next day, my mum and my brother asked me if I'd been up watching TV. They had apparently heard voices in the hall, and we all described them as the same, a male and a female, talking at a loud whisper, saying things that we just couldn't understand. To my knowledge, these voices have been coming back once a week for about 7 years now as well. But 2 years ago, also, I moved out into a 1940s-era duplex with a few friends. I was superstitious and was told by my mum to never even look at a Ouija board. But I was drunk on Halloween night during our party, and my roommate had one, so we decided to use it in the cellar, dirt room in our basement. We tried it in my room first, and we got nothing. We didn't get much on the board itself besides it asking to talk to the 3 girls who lived in the house. Once we all got on the board, it just went dead silent, no matter where you used it. But my one roommate said that she felt dirty and needed to shower at like 3:30 a.m. So I sat at the chair that's near the bathroom to make sure she was okay, and about 15 minutes later, I hear a blood-curdling scream. I open the door and see her white as a ghost, slack-jawed, pointing at the mirror, and she had a simple 4-letter name that was drawn in ruler straight lines on the mirror, backwards. I told her to stop playing tricks, and I attempted to recreate it, but for the life of me, I couldn't get the lines that straight, and the letters also immediately condensed. So I tried to scrub the original letters off to no avail. There was no residue, and they just wouldn't budge, and it took 4 days for it to fade, which was really weird. The next morning, though, the roommate who showered and I decided to give the board one more whirl to see if we could find out who was torturing us. Our other roommate was at work, so it was just us. We asked simple questions and got answers about who we were talking to, apparently an older man that was the original owner of the home. We asked why he was angry, and he just said A. My name and the roommate that was gone both have A names. I asked if I was the issue, and he said no. I asked why the other girl was an issue, and the board spelled out bitch so fast that we almost lost the planchette. Apparently, it turns out that he was upset that she constantly bitched about how old and how awful our house was. I told him that I was sorry about that, and we would make sure that she respected the home. I asked my mum to come in and cleanse the house the next day. She was pretty pissed at me, but obliged anyway. I didn't tell her where we did the Ouija board, but she walked through the upstairs and froze at the bathroom door. She said that she would not go in there and that she felt a really strong energy coming from the mirror, which she couldn't see from the angle that she was at. She then walked through the rest and stopped at the stairwell, and she simply said, "You did it in the cellar, didn't you?" She did a cleansing ritual, and as soon as she banished this spirit, we all felt a really strong whoosh of just cold air above our heads. And after that, we all had issues and were fighting constantly. The other 2 girls moved out soon after, and after they left, I pretty much had no issues. The cellar door downstairs still pops open on its own from time to time, but I don't feel a negative energy anymore, that's for sure. I did eventually cleanse the board and took it out to the front yard. A couple of months later, too, I had a guest at our house that asked if he could have it. I told him that I was going to destroy it anyway, but he begged until I relented. And well, I guess it's his problem now, right? I do have some more stories from recent years if anyone's interested. My mum does ghost hunting now, so we've seen a lot of crazy stuff, but this was definitely one of the creepier ones. I was around 14 years old when this took place. We had just moved to my grandmother's neighborhood like 3 weeks prior. I was extremely familiar with this place as I'd visited them every weekend. And down the road a bit was a small pond that was in the middle of the next neighborhood over. I would regularly go down there to fish as well, as my dad's friend owned the property where the pond was at. He had a very nice house with a little gazebo that protruded out of the water a little bit. He lived right near the small dam at the end of the lake, and the dam was about 8 feet high, I'd say, and on the side that wasn't facing the lake, there was a 50-foot concrete slope that went into the woods below. So it was a Friday night in January, and me being the avid fisherman I was getting ready for a trip down there the next morning. I went to bed kind of early with my dog and fishing buddy, Angel. She's a Jack Russell Rat Terrier mix, and I had her since I was about 6 years old. A man's best friend for sure. But once we got into bed, I just couldn't sleep for some reason, and I just kind of tossed and turned. I finally dozed off for about an hour, I suppose, but woke up for no apparent reason again and couldn't go back to sleep. I looked at my phone, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and after a short thought, I decided to just go down to the pond and start fishing. I grabbed my fishing pole, tackle box, my thermos, and Angel's leash, and we started walking down to the pond. You might think that I was pretty crazy for going fishing in 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but I was really into fishing. And besides, I was having great luck fishing down there at night recently, so I wanted to go and push my luck. It was a short walk to get to the lake, but I had to walk around it to the far side where I fished, which was another half-mile or so. It was really foggy that night as well, but I could see pretty well still because it was a full, or almost full, moon that night. It was extremely quiet too. Usually the road that I was walking on is very busy at all hours, but it was just too cold for anyone to be out that night. We made it to my dad's friend's house, and we walked down to the gazebo, and I sit my things down and take a drink of hot chocolate before I start getting my line ready for the water. Angel also found a small place in between the wooden benches to lay down. Now, this next part may seem a bit unimportant, but please just bear with me because it is. So, once I got my fishing pole rigged up, I casted it out and sat it down to wait for a bit. My fishing reel has a setting to where if a fish tugs on the line, it makes a really loud clicking noise to let you know that you have a bite. Well, that's the setting that I put it out to, and I set it down and took a look around. It was about 2:30 a.m, give or take at this point. I look over to the left at the houses, I look over to the right towards the dam, which was about 40 feet from where I was. It was still very quiet, and I continued to look around the area, just kind of taking in the moonlit water. But then, suddenly, I see something out of the corner of my eye to my right. There, by the dam, I see a white blob walking on all fours, looking as if it's smelling the ground or something. It looked like a white dog from where I was, and I didn't want Angel to see it, so I picked a leash up and kept an eye on the thing. At this point, I still thought it was a dog, and I wasn't scared in the least bit. But then it made its way up to the wall dam, and then it stood up on two legs, which was when I realized that this was no dog. I crouched down beside the wooden bench where Angel was lying, grabbed her up and faced her away from the creature. The thing didn't see me, and I was going to do my damnedest to make sure it never did. I intensively watched it as it looked around the area and then proceeded to jump up onto the 8-foot-tall dam effortlessly, almost as if it floated or something. And then it did something really strange. Its pale white skin started glowing, almost like a firefly. I could see the bluish-colored veins in its back and calf muscles, and this thoroughly freaked me out. Then it turned around to where I could see its face. It was about 3.5 feet tall, had a short torso, long skinny legs and arms, a wide head, almost oval-shaped I suppose, large ears, a large mouth with many small teeth and huge eyes that were yellowish-orange in colour. And on top of that, I have to repeat that it was glowing. I was nearly hyperventilating, trying to control my breathing, hoping that this thing wouldn't hear me. Angel, too, was now aware of its presence, and the hair on her neck stood up as she started growling and struggling to get out of my arms. I kept watching it, terrified to move, and it didn't do anything when it got up to the top of the dam. It just kind of squatted down and looked as though it was examining something in its hands. After a few minutes of watching it, I'd worked up the idea to just go back the way I came, and once I got to the road, just run as fast as I can home. Angel was growing increasingly aggressive in trying to see the creature, but I kept her buried in my big winter jacket the best that I could. I decided to just leave my stuff there and come back to get it the next day, and I slowly stood up, and just as I was about to start walking around the gazebo, my fishing pole started making a really loud zing sound. And I mean, of all the times, now I get a fish bite. But my attention went straight back to the creature, which was now frantically looking around for the source of the noise. In my panic, I forgot to keep Angel covered up, and she saw the creature for the first time. She started barking like I've never heard her bark before, as if she was in terror or something. And that, I must admit, scared me. The creature then saw us there, and it bent down as if it were about to start running towards us. I tried to take a step back and start running, but I slipped on the cold, hard ground. I landed on my side and looked at the creature. Thankfully, it hadn't started to chase us, but it let out the most disturbing scream that I've ever heard. The only way I can describe it is if it sounded like a woman screaming, but backwards, if that makes sense. It then jumped from the dam into the woods about 100 feet away and faded as it landed. I'm ashamed to admit that I was in tears now, and my fight or flight kicked in. I grabbed Angel and I ran as fast as I could, all the way up to the door of my house. Too afraid to look back and see if it was behind me, I eventually got home, and I don't really remember what happened till the next day. I must have passed out or something, because all I remember is it seeming like a dream. But the next day, I went to go and get my gear from the gazebo, and it all was still there, so it definitely wasn't a dream. I didn't go back to the pond, even during the day, for at least a few years. I told my mum and my dad the story months later, and while they do believe me, I still wonder what that creature actually was. Please let me know your thoughts on this, because honestly, I don't know what to think. This happened back when I was in high school. It was summer break, so my friends and I were having a fire at one of their houses. It was getting late, so I was getting ready to drive home before our town's curfew at midnight. My friend Stacy asked if I could give her a ride home instead of having one of her parents come and pick her up. It was out of my way, but I had a bit of a crush on her at the time, so I told her of course. We were on our way to her house and just kind of chatting. We live in a pretty rural area, so there are not any streetlights, and if it's late, there's a good chance that you won't see anyone else on the road. I'm not really paying attention to the road, and I make a turn, and a man runs out in front of my truck, waving his arms frantically. I slam on the brakes, almost hitting this guy, and at this point, I should have just kept driving, but thinking that something was wrong, I immediately put my truck into park and hop out. The man starts asking for help with his car, saying that he broke down and his cell phone is dead, so he can't call anyone. He asked me if I could give him a ride to the nearest gas station so he could make a call. Another car pulls up behind me and stops very close behind my truck, and this is the first time that I actually take a look at my surroundings. It is now almost midnight, and this man's car is just nowhere in sight, and he keeps pressing me to help him. And it was at this point that I make my first good decision during this whole situation and begin to back up to my truck as nonchalantly as possible. I jump in and drive off as quickly as possible as this man is now screaming at me. The car that was behind us starts to follow, and after a little while I decide to make 4 right turns, and after I feel that they weren't following us, I eventually take her home. The road the guy flagged us down on was how I actually got home as well, and being afraid to go back down that road, I had to go the long way that added a good bit of time to my ride. I didn't get home till well after my parents wanted me back, and I explained what happened to my parents the next morning at breakfast, and my dad rightfully chewed me out for putting Stacy in that situation. It was a sketchy moment for sure, and something that I'll never repeat. Not even half an hour ago, I just had one of the freakiest paranormal experiences that I've had in a long time. To give you guys some backstory, I live in an apartment attached to a funeral home. I'm a mortuary science student, and I work for this funeral home to get experience while I'm in school to be a mortician. The funeral home happened to have a vacant apartment set privately in the back that I just couldn't possibly turn down because I just moved away from home for this school and I needed an inexpensive place to live. But since the day I moved in, I've been having these very notable paranormal experiences. But for a couple of months, I just kept it to myself, not wanting to seem like I was feeding into some spooky funeral home stigma or making it up. But eventually I was experiencing enough that I had to bring it up with a co-worker of mine, and she confirmed that she and a few other employees had seen and heard the same things I have. That being said, it's not news to any of us that the place is haunted, if that's what you can call it. So today, after I got home from classes and went home, I was feeling extremely uneasy. My apartment felt just extra dark, and I felt sort of jumpy, I suppose. I was standing in my bathroom braiding my hair, and one of my co-workers texted me. She said that she has a weird feeling and asks me to go and check the front doors of the funeral home to make sure that they're locked. I read her text as I braided my hair, and her next message pops up, and it says, "I'm 99% sure I locked it, but I just have a nagging feeling about something." I tell her that I'd go and check, and I finished braiding my hair and slipped on my shoes and walked to the door of my apartment that opens up into the back of the funeral home. The lights are off, and I don't bother turning them on, as the motion sensor in the hallway always kicks on by themselves. I made my way to the front lobby, which was dark, not counting the light through the front door windows. I walked to the front doors and pushed. And sure enough, both of them are unlocked. At that moment, I had a really heavy feeling like someone was behind me or watching me as well. I kept turning around to look, but standing by the light at the doors and looking into the dark lobby made it almost impossible to see. Eventually, I just hurried up and locked the doors and made my way back through the lobby, and as I was about to enter the hallway, I hear a little girl giggling. I stopped dead in my tracks for a moment, because just at the end of her giggling, it sounded like it was coming from behind a door not 6 feet away from me. At this, I got chills on my entire body, and I just hightailed it back into the lit hallway and into my doorway. I locked the door behind me and immediately heard a loud bang from a room in the funeral home. I have no idea what it was, but it was very loud, and I wasn't about to go and check it, that's for sure. As I was standing there, pretty much crapping my pants, I texted my coworker back saying the doors were both unlocked. And as I'm typing in my story of what happened, she says, "I don't know, man. I've been getting weird vibes in there all day." It had been a few weeks since I'd had anything strange happen, but now I was extremely on edge. There are two spirits, or entities, or whatever you call them, that myself as well as 3 other co-workers have all seen. One of them is of a little girl, and she looks maybe 8 years old. She's slightly taller than average, and she shows herself so briefly that you wonder if you even saw it. I would almost say that she looks 10, but when we hear her giggle, she sounds like a young girl of maybe 6 years old. The other is a tall, shadow-like man who wears a long black coat and a black hat, and he is an entirely different story. I'm chilled in here right now because some days in here feel just weirder than others, and tonight feels like the kind where I probably won't get any sleep. I feel so anxious right now because usually these things happen in waves, so I feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to happen. Anyway, I've been so amazed at all the feedback that I've gotten for this story that I thought that I should share more of what I've experienced here. A lot of people have actually asked me that I share more, so here's some of them. The very day I moved in, I was trying to clean and dust everything as I was unpacking. I was listening to music and polishing one of my end tables when something caught my eye. I glanced up towards my hallway where the bathroom is located and briefly saw what looked like a little girl peeking at me from behind the door frame. I did a double take, not sure what I was seeing, and when I did, she was gone. I paused my music and kind of stood there with a stupid look on my face, I'm guessing. And then I heard a soft rustling noise from the bathroom, like the sound of maybe the shower curtain or something. I walked over to the bathroom and peeked in, but of course there was nothing there. My first few nights there were actually pretty normal after that too. Some strange noises like bumps on the wall, knocking and brushing noises, but I attributed all of that to the fact that I was in a new place and those noises were probably normal in the building. One night, though, I was taking a shower, minding my own business, when I felt an ice-cold air on my back. I didn't have the air on at this time, and there were no windows in my bathroom that could cause a draft like that. But I felt immediately uneasy and peeked out behind my shower curtain to see that everything was normal. I went back to showering and tried to pretend like nothing happened. But as I was facing the water, my towel that was draped up over the curtain rod fell to the floor. I jumped and whipped around quickly, peeking behind the curtain again, and nothing. I was pretty shaken though now, and I picked up my towel and draped it back over the rod. I tried to hurry up and finish my shower, but just as I was about to turn off the water, I hear my bathroom door click. In absolute fear and panic and ready to nakedly fight someone, I ripped off the curtain to see my door slowly opening. I stood there and watched until it slowly reached the doorstop. I said something along the lines of, "Holy crap," through tears and fumbled for my towel and ran just straight out of my bathroom. I got dressed and left for the rest of the day and didn't come back until about 9 that night. Nothing happened for the rest of that evening, and after that, things were pretty quiet for a little while at least. Around 2 weeks later, it was a little after midnight, and I was doing laundry that night. My washer and dryer are in the actual prep room where we embalm people, so to do laundry, I'd have to go back into the hallway of the funeral home. I just put in a load of washing and was walking back to my apartment door at the very end of the hallway when I heard a door latch. Kind of like the door was closed in the frame, but not latched, if that makes sense. It made me jump, and I turned around, and at the end of the hallway, I saw a really tall shadow man. Now, the owner of the funeral home was a big man who wears a long black coat in the winter and has this thick black cowboy hat sort of thing that he wears. So, for a split second, I thought maybe it was my boss who had come in for something. But it definitely wasn't. It felt like a good 2 to 3 seconds that I watched him cross the end of the hallway, and then he just disappeared into thin air, almost as I was focusing on him. I mentioned in my original story that there are motion sensor lights in this hallway, and these lights were all on during this encounter. He was tall and really big. He had a hat that was similar to the one my boss wears and was black from completely top to the bottom, like a really, really opaque shadow. Needless to say, I almost crapped myself again, and I bolted back to my apartment and locked the door. I was so scared and just in so much disbelief that I was actually lightheaded and had to sit down. I still didn't mention him or the little girl that I saw to anyone I work with. But one day, when I came home from class, I noticed my microwave time had changed to military time. I didn't think anything of it, and I messed with the settings, switching it back. The next night I was working, cleaning one of the lounges, and I noticed that the time on the microwave in there was on military time too. At that point, I honestly figured that maybe there was a power outage that day, and when the microwaves kicked back on, they just went wonky and switched to military time. This was until the next day, which was my day off. I slept in and I lounged in my bed for like an hour, and one of my best friends called me. We'd been talking for about 20 minutes, and I was like, alright, I should probably get up and do something, I suppose. And I glanced to see what time it is, and my alarm clock was on military time. Now, my alarm clock is a cheap battery-operated alarm that doesn't even plug into a wall. I've had it for about 4 years and had never seen it switch to military time, and I just went silent on the phone and stared at the clock, trying to find some sort of logical explanation for this. The microwave kind of made sense at first, but then with my alarm clock, I just couldn't shake the feeling that it all meant something. It wasn't long after that, too, is when things got considerably spookier. So, probably about 3 days later, I suppose, I was coming back home one afternoon from classes. I came right in and threw my keys and my purse onto the kitchen table, and then turned my back to the table to plug the sink and start running water to do my dishes. My dishes were being piled up, and I swore to myself that I'd do them first thing when I got home. Anyway, I was letting the sink fill and turned to get my keys and purse from the kitchen table and put them on the end table by my door, which is where I always place them so I don't forget them while I'm running out the door at like 3 a.m. death calls. And my purse was there, but my keys weren't. And I had just come in and threw them on the table. I knew that. It only took a few seconds to get the sink ready, so I knew they just didn't get up and walk away. But bewildered, I started looking under the table and on the floor, patting my pockets trying to find my keys, and, I just put them there. Frustrated, though, I go to plop down on my couch and ponder if I'm just going crazy. I have a heavy quilt on my couch, and when I went to lift it up and sit down, right there were my keys. Now, I didn't go anywhere near my couch when I came in. I'm 100% positive that I put my keys on the table next to my purse when I came in, and there was no reason that they should be under that quilt. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. On my keyring, I have my parents' house key and my car key on the main key rings, and a second key ring is attached to that one with my apartment door keys on it. And the key ring with the apartment keys on it was stretched and bent as if someone had tried to rip the key ring straight off the other one. But the key rings aren't flimsy bendy ones either. I could hardly open them enough to lock key rings together when I put them on, and it would have taken some serious force to completely pull open the key ring like that. I actually do have a picture of my keys somewhere in my laptop that I'll try and locate and send to you guys later so that you guys can see what I mean. But anyway, obviously my stomach dropped through my butt when I saw my keys were just all messed up under the blanket like that. I almost didn't even believe if I was seeing it all correctly, and I felt like I was going crazy. At this point, I was feeling like I should at least vent to someone about what was going on. So, night or two after that, I was at a working visitation with an older woman who was worked for the boss for a long time. She's my favorite co-worker, as she's easy to talk to and reminds me of my grandma or something like that. And she asked me how I was getting settled in the apartment and if I was enjoying it. I told her how much I loved my apartment, but there were some weird things that just didn't make sense happening. She asked what I meant, and I honestly didn't want to say it because, well, I didn't want her to think that I was crazy or trying to pull the wool over her eyes or something. After my hesitation, I just asked if she thought the funeral home was haunted. She explained to me that she had had some strange experiences here as well as a couple of others that I work with too. They've all heard loud screaming and moaning from time to time in the prep room. They've heard giggling, unexplained doors opening and slamming, etc. But what upset me the most was that she told me about a tall black man with a hat that she had seen in the back hallway a couple of times. And at that point, I word vomited and told her everything that had happened since I moved in. And that was the night that I felt like it was confirmed to me that there was something or things here. I remember I honestly felt like vomiting at one point because I was so scared, but at least I knew that I wasn't crazy, right? Strangely enough, a few weeks after that, nothing really big happened. I mean, sure, I would always hear the strange noises at night. It's not uncommon to hear a door open and close by itself somewhere in the funeral home, and I've also heard people talking, hear cots sliding around on the floor, and the same moans and screams my co-workers have all heard. But this has almost all become normal to me, so although it's freaky, it wasn't bothering me directly, and I could live with that. At least for a little while, I suppose. Because, once again, things picked up one day when I was in my bedroom putting clothes away. I was sitting on my floor folding a mountain of laundry when I heard a loud, clear-as-day sound of a man clearing his throat in my living room. The kind that you'd hear when you try to get someone's attention. It was so clear and real that I honestly didn't even think it was a ghost at first. I was confused for a moment, thinking that maybe my boss had come in to speak to me, but surely he'd knock. I mean, nobody would ever just walk in here. So I hopped up and stepped into my living room, and as you can guess, there was nobody there. I peered around the corner to see if anyone was in my bathroom, but there was no one. The realization eventually set in that I was alone, and my stomach sort of dropped at that point. But honestly, I was so used to so much activity that after a few minutes of pacing around in disbelief, I just kind of shook it off and went back to folding laundry. In the most recent weeks, the most I've experienced are the normal sounds and voices and bumps in the night that I always hear. But one night though, a couple of random lights and my TV all shut off at once unexpectedly, and I had to go into the funeral home utility room to flip the switches in the breaker box. I notice that when I have someone over and start telling them about these things, the lights or the TV will just shut off. A friend of mine has actually experienced this with me on 3 different occasions, in fact. And that pretty much catches me up to the original story that I shared with you guys. I'm not gonna lie, guys, it's been an absolute ride being here. Some nights it's nothing, and other nights I sleep with the blankets over my head. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this. It actually sort of feels therapeutic to share it with all of you guys, and I never guessed that so many people would be interested in my story. And so, thank you to everyone for being so cool and listening, even if you don't believe. This was about 2 years ago, so I was around 16 or 17. It should also be noted too that I'm a 5-foot tall girl and my twin sister is just 2 inches taller than me, so we're relatively small. It was a weekend night and my sister and I were left alone since my mum and stepdad and little brother left to go to a party. My sister was in her room and I was in the living room watching TV, so I'm right next to the front door. I hear a knock about a minute after my family had just left, and I go to open it since I assume my family may have forgotten something important and return to go and get whatever item it was. Now, because I am small, I actually can't peek through the peephole even on tippy toes. If I look through the blinds though, whoever is outside would be able to tell because we have those wooden blinds where all of them shift to whichever direction if you move one. But I didn't think about doing either of those things since I did think it was a family member, so when I opened the door, There was a woman there. I didn't know her, and she seemed to be in her early 20s, had dark hair, and was a bit taller than me and my sister, but that was all I could make out since we didn't have the light at our front door and just the moonlight that was barely there. She proceeded to ask if there was a certain someone that lived here, and I told her no because I knew no one of that name. The whole thing was a bit creepy, I must admit. She wore dark clothing, she spoke in a really low voice, and kept looking at the screen door handle as if she was waiting for me to open it. I was thankful that separated us, and she said her goodbyes and left, and I closed and locked the doors. I decided to go to the other side of my house where the lights were off, and she wouldn't be able to see if I opened the blinds of that window, and I see her in the driveway just looking at my house while on the phone with someone. Stayed there for a good 3 minutes after the call ended, and then she just left. Okay, I was creeped out, and I told my little sister, who watched TV with me in the living room after that. About 15 minutes go by, and we hear a knock on the window. We got scared until we heard my aunt's voice, so we opened the door. She came to return something, I believe, and noticed how spooked we were, so we told her what happened, and she told us to get in her car and we'll get to Starbucks to make us feel better. Sure enough, it did the trick, and she dropped us off at our house, and didn't leave for about 5 minutes until we got the house and everything locked up. And then, soon after that, she left. Another knock was heard about 3 minutes later, and I assumed my aunt realized that she forgot to give back whatever item she originally was going to drop off, and I opened the door without even checking who it was, and standing in front of me was this huge guy. He was at least 6'4" and maybe like 250 pounds. And just overall I knew that he would 100% be able to take me and my sister down without a fight, no sweat. He asked for the same man the woman earlier asked for, and I told him that I don't know who that is and he didn't live here. He also looked at the screen door handle as if he were waiting for me to open it as well, and then just left. My sister and I were pretty terrified because there was no way that was a coincidence. I look out through the blinds again, and in the middle of the driveway between our cars, I saw the man talking to the same woman who was here earlier. But they talked for 5 minutes and went walking to their car, which was parked all the way on the other side of the road and 2 houses down. And it was creepy because we had plenty of parking space in front of or near our house. My sister and I triple-checked every door and window was locked, put our dog inside, and just waited for our family to come home soon. My family soon came home from the party, and we told them what happened more in depth. We had actually called them after the guy came, but party was about an hour away without all the traffic, so there wasn't much that they could do. They were creeped out as well, though, and my sister and my stepdad are certain that whoever used to live in our house was some sort of a drug dealer or something illegal like that, and he has some people very angry at him and have come to our house thinking that he still lives there, but also believe that maybe they were a part of whatever the guy did and won't hesitate to come after us. It's been this way ever since we moved in about 4 years ago. Strange people just arriving at our house and weird occurrences and hearing weird things. Anyway, everything seems to have calmed down a bit for at least a little while here, so I guess we'll just see how it goes. I have not had many paranormal experiences in my life, but this is one that I just can't explain, and therefore I'm asking you guys for your input on what might have happened. So, I've always been a bit of a skeptic, probably because deep down I'd rather believe that these things just don't exist. Life is complicated enough as it is, if you get me. But anyways, here's the story. I'm from a small village in Scotland that is northwest of Glasgow. My family have a small holiday cottage on the Isle of Cole. If you feel like it, you can have a look on Google Maps to get an idea of where it is. My father's mother was born on this island, and her blood can be traced back to the 1600s on that island. The island only has around 200 inhabitants currently, but it's thought that it used to be about 1,000 or so. At its longest, it's around 12 miles or so, and at its widest, it's around 3 miles. There are countless stories and folk tales of people seeing unnatural things on this island. Seeing glimpses of battles that happened hundreds of years ago, or seeing old workers walking through your farmhouse who aren't really there. You get the idea, I suppose, but most people who have lived in these houses have lived in there for a very long time, and some energies have obviously been left behind. Our cottage used to be in the dairy and cheese section. The barns around the house still have all the slots where the cows would stay. It's a really old cottage and has had many owners before us. It was last used as a dairy in the 70s. Fun fact too is that its cheese was once exported into the house lords of London. Now, when I was around 10, we extended the small cottage into some ruined piggeries that were attached to the end of the cottage. But we probably disturbed some old spirits or something when we knocked through those old walls, but it had to be done. The renovation meant that me and my sister now both had a bedroom each, which was nice, I must admit. But my bedroom was pretty much empty apart from some bunk beds at the far end away from the door. For the first year or so, I would feel a bit off about the pitch-black room when trying to go to sleep. But it was when I was around 12 that I saw her for the first time. She was around my age, stood in the middle of the room, a light from across the courtyard beaming in from a slit in my curtain, hitting the side of her face and body. And clear as day, she was there, stood in the middle of my room. As soon as I saw her, I immediately panicked and turned to face the wall. I spent the rest of that night covered in sweat and shaking in fear, and I knew what I had seen. I continued to see her now and again, sometimes 2 days in a row. She eventually became an unexpected feature in my room, to me at least, and it got to the point where I could peacefully fall asleep with her in the room because I knew from experience that all she ever did was stand there. She meant no harm. She was just kind of part of the room as the stonework around her was. I also had a close friend come out to the island when I was around 14. I had not told him about her, but upon going to bed on the first night, we were there and I saw her arrive in the middle of the room. I also knew that he was still awake as we had just been talking. He was on the top bunk and I was on the bottom one, but there was just dead silence. I didn't say anything and neither did he. The next morning he seemed a bit off too, and after probing a few times he finally admitted that he thought that he saw a girl in our room the night before. I must admit that I was a bit scared by this, but also kind of relieved that somebody else had seen her finally because it meant that I wasn't going crazy. I told him about how I'd been seeing her there for years now and that this little girl really was there. When I was around 15, I made an effort to communicate with her once while she was visible and talk her through the transition of moving on. Not talking with words, but speaking without talking, almost pleading with her, telling her that she had nothing to fear about moving on. I told her that there was no benefit to her being stuck here where she was, and she just walked out of my room through my closed door. And that was the last time that I ever saw her. So, time went on, and my dad was on a boat going to Cole one day when I was around 15 or 16. A family member of ours had unfortunately died and was being buried on the island that day. My dad was sat in the lounge area of the boat and just by chance started speaking with an elderly man who was sat across from him. It turned out to be the guy who owned our cottage back in the 70s and 80s. Apparently, he had sold the cottage to the person who sold it to us. By this point, my dad knew that I had seen this little girl in my room on many occasions. And it turns out that this elderly man had a daughter, and unfortunately she died of TB, tuberculosis, at a young age. She was around 9 or 10, and she used to look after the pigs in the piggeries that we knocked into and renovated. She's buried on Tyree, the island next to Cole, and my dad didn't say anything to the man when he heard this, but it immediately clicked in his head. This was the young girl that I'd been seeing. Eventually, though, my dad brings a psychic out to the island to see what she picks up on. He hadn't told her about the little girl or anything, and she's very sensitive to these sorts of things and is well known for clearing buildings and smudging, etc. They arrived at the cottage during daylight, and I've never seen the little girl during the day, but as soon as our friend walks through the doorway of my room, she freezes and starts talking. She said, "There has been a young girl visible in this room recently, maybe around 10 years old. Is this your son's room now?" He said yes, and she said, "Has he ever seen her?" He said, "I'm not sure," and she said, "I think he's helped her move on, but I'm not sure how, because she has moved on." This, I must admit, was further validation for me that, again, I wasn't going crazy and that my friend and I actually did see something. But like I said at the beginning, though, I'm still very much a skeptic, and there could be possible other answers, I know. And so, I look forward to hearing some feedback from you guys. Thanks. I'm 26 and female, but when I was 8 years old or so, and my two brothers, 10 and 6, something happened that would change everything for my family. So, both my parents were police officers, and I know that most people would think that there's nothing to be afraid of when your parents serve to protect. But my brothers and I, we were not prepared for what the next few years had in store for us. So, my parents' relationship began to get, well, rocky for a lack of a better term, when my stepdad reconnected with a woman that he knew. At first, it was just a friendship, so my dad thought anyway, but this woman wanted much, much more. To this day, I still don't know if it was an affair, but my parents are still together, so I assume that it wasn't. But this woman was obsessed with my dad. She began calling the house to talk to my dad, and this was pre-cell phone era, and when my mum tried to put a stop to it, she started leaving ungodly threatening voicemails on the answering machine. She was saying things like, "I'm going to slaughter you and your bastard children," meaning my elder brother and I, "and then your husband will be mine." My dad blocked her number from the house phone, but then she started mailing sickening letters. It got to a point where my mum tried to get a restraining order, in fact. After a year or two, though, the letters stopped, until one night, my brothers and I are up playing games on our Super Nintendo in their room, just demolishing each other in Street Fighter or something, when we hear scratches at the bedroom window. Spooked, my little brother ran and told my mum. With gun cocked and loaded, she proceeds to check around the house, where she finds a knife where this woman tried to cut the screens of the windows. I guess trying to break in? After that, my mum installed a security system on the house, a really nice one too, and every entry of the house had to have a code to get in. And the alarm tripped a few times, but after that, nothing. A few months pass and we come home from the mall in Atlanta to find an envelope taped to the front door. And inside were pictures of the inside of our house. The Polaroid kind that you had to shake to develop, including a detailed message on how she would expose all of us. And after that, my parents sold the house and we just moved away. I must admit that it makes me sad too, because I really did love that house. I'd like to start off by saying that this is not my story, but the story of a co-worker's. My buddy, who I'll call Josh, is the son of a priest. He told me a story recently that honestly scared me, so I wanted to share it with you guys. So Josh is in his mid-30s currently, but this story takes place when he was 10 years old. He said that one day when he was hanging out with his dad, a man came to visit his dad at home. When the man arrived, Josh's father told him to go into another room while his father and the man talked. Josh, being the curious kid that he was though, left the room but kept the door to the room slightly cracked so that he could hear what the adults were going to talk about. Josh said that a few minutes into their conversation, all seemed pretty normal, but it all quickly changed. He said that the man who came to visit his dad was having a normal conversation when all of a sudden the guy's voice just changed dramatically. Josh said that the guy's voice would change while talking to his dad, so much so that Josh thought that there were 3 people in the room talking instead of 2. He said that the man's other voice kept getting louder and meaner as it changed. He said the man would be calm, talking normally, and then he would just start yelling horrible things. Then he would calm down and speak softer again. At this point, the man would speak in his normal voice, then switch mid-sentence to a loud, angry voice every minute or so. He said that at some point, he heard the man say to his father in a distorted voice, "I'm going to kill you." And Josh, freaked out at this, shut the door and ran to his room until the two were finished talking. Not long after this, the man finally left and Josh went back to talk to his dad. He asked his dad what had happened with that man, but he told Josh not to worry about it and that he just had to help the man with something. To this day, Josh thinks that his father had performed some sort of ritual or exorcism to rid this man of a demon of sorts. He said that it's the scariest thing that he ever witnessed, hands down, and also that after this day he became a firm believer in the paranormal. I'm very lucky and live in a very, very close proximity to several really beautiful canyons, and I like to take my dog on hikes before work and such. So I took her and my mum's dog one day around 10 a.m. The canyon was pretty empty. It was a Wednesday or something, so it was just us on the trail that I like to hike. It's really long and winds along the face of a mountain. It's mostly a small dirt trail overlooking the main road, but there are a couple of areas that go back into the trees as well. There's a spot with a very large electrical box of some kind. I'm not sure if it's a generator or what, but it's in a gully surrounded by fencing. My mum's dog propped himself up on the small wooden barrier, probably to prevent avalanches or something, and looked intently at the box. I figured he saw a squirrel. Not directly behind us was a cluster of large trees, so it made sense. It seemed darker than the rest of the area, around 6 or so of them, I suppose, but I didn't think anything of it until my dog turned around and bristled, growling. Now, she's cranky as hell, so I knew her growl that meant, get away, I'm feeling like being rude to guests, and this was not it. This was different. It was just pure aggression. She was also just staring right at that spot. My mum's dog joined in, and they just started growling for about 15 seconds. When all of a sudden this massive 10-foot long at least black thing just whooshes out of the trees, and it just literally seemed to disappear into nothing. The trees were immediately back to normal, kind of strangely in a way, and after that I just decided to dip ASAP. To this day, I still have no idea what the hell that was. Maybe it's not paranormal, but it just seemed way too big to be a normal forest dweller. I'm really not sure what it was, but I got out of there quickly, that's for sure. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.